former President Thabo Mbeki is joining the voices of those who are paying tribute to Advocate George Bizos. In fact, he joins us now. Good evening, Mr. Mbeki. Thank you so much for your time tonight. I suppose a good place to begin would be, how have you received the news of Advocate George Bizos' passing?
Good evening, Kathy. Yes, no, the news is very sad. It's very sad. Of course, we knew that George was not very well, and indeed very old. So, in a sense, his passing away has not come completely as a surprise. But in any case, it's very sad because we're losing a very valuable person, a person who made really a sterling contribution in terms of our struggle for liberation. So it is indeed a great loss, a loss of somebody who, I'm saying, makes this giant contribution, but at the same time was very humble, very accessible, very friendly, somebody you could interact with at any time, who never carried any airs about him, despite the fact that he was such an extraordinary human being. It's a sad loss, and it's a very sad moment.
Let's talk about the kind of role that he would have played, not only representing some of the key leaders of the ANC, but the association that would have had to your own family.
Well, you know, I've been saying that George belonged among a particular group of people. That particular group is these lawyers. Because I think we, in a sense, we have underestimated the importance of the struggle, the legal struggle, which was one of the fronts on which we had to fight in order to achieve our liberation, and indeed one of the fights we had to engage in order to define the new South Africa. George Bizos belonged in that group, which included Bram Fischer. It included Arthur Chaskalson, it included Sidney Kentridge, included Izzy Maisels, included Joel Joffe. These are very high-flying legal people, but very, very committed to the struggle for liberation and very committed to justice. And so we naturally, being involved in struggle, my parents, myself, would naturally have had to interacted with George for a long time, including some of these the fellow legal fighters that I've mentioned. So I'm saying that George is an outstanding person belonging to what was an outstanding group, and on this front, particularly on this front, the legal front, which we don't talk enough about, but was very, very important during the struggle against apartheid, and also very important in terms of the construction, the definition of the new South Africa with a new constitution. And George played a very important role in defining what goes into that constitution. And indeed, also has played a very central role in terms of, you know, the pursuit of justice, the defense of the victims of violence. You saw, for instance, the role he played during the TRC, that he appeared there a number of times on the side of the victims of what was called the gross human rights violations, to defend those people against these perpetrators of those gross human rights violations, or applying for amnesty and so on. So, and indeed, I'm saying that George belongs to that group and was a very prominent member of that group, which led us in terms of that particular front of struggle, which I'm saying is not only against apartheid, but for a democratic South Africa.
I want to build a little bit on that point, especially the war that was waged from the legal front against the apartheid system, because on some level, it would have come at great personal risk to him. And just earlier, we spoke to the daughter of Dumanogwe, who, of course, was one of those that George Bizos would allow to come and work from his chambers when he simply did not have a place to go. That risk, have we fully appreciated the extent to which the likes of George Bizos were literally endangering their own lives on the day-to-day as part of the struggle?
No, certainly I don't think we have. That is part of I'm saying the way that we have underestimated, underplayed this particular front of struggle, the legal one. And therefore we have underplayed indeed the matter that you are raising quite correctly, of the challenge that faced lawyers like George Bizos. Because here they must have been very much in the forefront of the apartheid regime, when the apartheid regime looks at who are these enemies, who are our enemies. People like George Bizos would have been among the front rank of the enemies of the apartheid system, and therefore would have had face the danger of victimization of all sorts, including assassination, by the apartheid regime. Sure, I agree with you that indeed we haven't sufficiently appreciated the fact that people like George Bizos, in fact, took their lives into their own hands when they said their value system demands that they stand on the side of the oppressed, that their value system demands that they do something to contribute to the ending of the system of apartheid.
What role do you think that his own personal history, having come to South Africa as a refugee, played in ensuring that he was always on the side of the oppressed? Do you think that was part of what led him to take the decision that he did and be on the side of the black majority in this country?
Oh, yes, no, I have absolutely no doubt that his Greek origins were an important part in terms of the formation of the thinking of a George Bizos. Coming out of Greece, coming into South Africa as Greek, and I'm quite sure that in those early years when they were here, they would have had experienced discrimination. Other white sections of the population, particularly the Afrikaners, would look down on them. So I'm quite sure that the fact of his origins would have been a very important part in the formation of the thinking and of the character of a George Bizos. And therefore he couldn't. And then, of course, the things that happened to Greece, George never lost contact with Greece. And the things that happened in Greece during the Second World War, after the Second World War, when what we call the Black Kenyans took over the military coup in Greece during the 60s and so on, all of those things would have been part of, I'm saying, his formation. Because that struggle for the democratization of South Africa was also at times echoed in the struggle for the democratization of Greece itself. So I have no doubt that indeed those Greek origins were an important part of what made George Bizos what he was.
Mr. Mbeki, if you would so indulge us, I'd like you to talk to me about the relationship, the personal relationship that you may have enjoyed with Advocate Bizos. What was that like?
Well, you know, George was very, very accessible, very easy to reach, very easy to talk to. So naturally, particularly when we came back into the country from exile from 1990 onwards, that contact became quite regular, because George, as I was saying, George was not only a lawyer and therefore defending the law, justice, and so on, but he was also a combatant for liberation. And so we could engage him like that on those issues, even on matters that required the defense of the ANC in those when we came back, but before 1994. You'd remember, for instance, this important case when there was conflict between the ANC and the IFP around the then headquarters of the ANC, what was called Shell House. George had to defend the ANC in that particular case. There are other cases of this nature, but at all times, the personal contact with George was really of one who is one of us in terms of the struggle, not just a lawyer-client relationship, but you could sit and engage. I was saying to somebody earlier today, for instance, that in some of this interaction, George would say to me, for instance, that, no, we've got to be very careful. We as the ANC need to be careful because some of the judges who came from the old order, responding to the new thing that's emerged about a truly independent judiciary, were developing a view that in order to prove their independence as judges, they had to find against the ANC and against an ANC government. So you needed to be, he was saying, we need to be very careful about what we do because there are people with that kind of frame of mind. Never mind what the facts say, never mind what the law says, but I'm going to demonstrate that I'm indeed a truly independent judge, and therefore I will find against these ones who are in authority. So we'd have discussions of that kind with George, because I'm saying he was sensitive to the fact that it's not just, as I'm saying, we have a relationship of a client and a lawyer, but we are building a new society and got to be sensitive to all the nuances of that society. So, so that was the nature of our interaction with George.
Before I let you go, Mr. Mbeki, what do you think is the gap that he leaves behind in our society?
No, we need, one of the things that we need, Kathy, is a very skilled group of people to help us to rebuild South Africa. Skilled in terms of having the necessary skills, like George would have the skills as a lawyer, professional skills like that. But you also need the same people who are skilled with a value system, the kind of value system which drove a George Bizos, that I must use my professional skill to advance particular values. Which values would also mean that you have a sense of service to the people. So you won't find a George Bizos who's flouting money, who's driving around in a Rolls Royce or things like that, because I'm saying he's a professional, a very competent, excellent as a professional, but with a value system and a commitment to serve the people. We need this kind of person in South Africa now, because with the challenges we face of the reconstruction of the country post-COVID-19 and all of that, and all of these myriad problems that we have not been able to solve since 1994, they need cadres of that kind. And so that's the example that George Bizos has left us. And hopefully all of these younger people, understanding better who George Bizos was, would want to imitate him, to emulate him, to have that kind of person, as I say, who is a dedicated professional, but also a dedicated person in terms of the value system with this commitment to serve the people of South Africa.